warm welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of South Asia. We are delighted to host this discussion on two interesting books on Prime Minister Narendra Modi. We're going to have the next general election in barely 9 months from now. We thought that this would be a good time to take a look at what Mr. Modi is all about. This book was written when he was still the Chief Minister of Gujarat, but this is a paperback which has just come out with a new introduction and all that. This one is by Shashi Shekhar, who ex-IIT Mumbai. Both of them will be introduced shortly. So we put both of the books together, invited authors to talk about Mr. Modi. I now request Prakash Nanda to introduce our distinguished guest.
Shashi Shekhar, I think I'm pronouncing it properly. Yeah. He's a technocrat, columnist, policy thinker, and author. He has served in various leadership roles in the Indian technology, media, and public policy space. Most recently, he was appointed chairperson of the External Experts Group to review the functioning and future roadmap of educational media research centers at 22 universities across India by the University Grants Commission. Between 2017 and 2022, and I think it's important, he served as the youngest and first technologies and public policy issues in the Indian context, covering digital platforms, media, artificial intelligence, broadcasting, and Web 3.0, among others. Most recently, he has co-founded a forum for the development ecosystem in India. He is an innovator, or as an innovator, he holds patents in the area of real-time event management within wireless and sensor networks. Come to the FCC and share your thoughts. The second guest this evening is Mr. Nilanjan Mukhopadhyay, who is a journalist who began his career as a journalist in early 1980s and is best known for his reportage and analysis of the rise and growth of Hindu organizations, their politics and agitations. He was among the first journalists to track the emergence of the Ram Janmabhoomi Babri Masjid conflict from the late 1980s. He has followed and written about the political and electoral emergence of BJP and its allies from that period. He is the author of Demolition, India at Crossroads 1994, one of the first books on the Ayodhya discord and the rise of Hindutva. He is also the author of Six, The Untold Agony of 1984. That book came out in 2015. And another book he has written is RSS, Icons of the Indian Right. I think that came out in 2019. His most recent book is The Demolition and the Verdict, Ayodhya and the Project to Reconfigure India, which came out 2 years ago, 2021. He is a regular columnist and contributor to several leading newspapers and web portals, and a well-known commentator and host on Indian television news and radio channels. Uh, the last sentence I am not, read. If I don't agree with it, there is a friend of mine. He lives in India's national capital, which is not true because he has been my friend and we studied together in the same university. No, we are ideologically different, but we are great friends. And that concept of debate is something we inherited from our university. Both are proud of that. We continue to be great friends and great good at it. And we reflected in his intellectual today. Thank you.
And Prakash, may I now invite Nilanjan, whose biography, many books on Mr. Modi, is rated as possibly the best biography of the Prime Minister. That is how another writer who did a biography of Modi told. May I now request Nilanjan tell us about how he came to write the book. He did extensive interviews with Mr. Modi when he was the spokesperson for the BJP in Delhi and Minister. Tell us all about it, Nilanjan. Thank you.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you, Venkat. I'm using just one name, Venkat. I think decades of association and knowing you, gives me that privilege to do that. But as the president of the FCC, I'm extremely grateful that we are all assembled in this room and to talk about. At least for the first time I've ever heard talking about a book which is 10 years old. Initially, when he asked me, I found it a bit funny that it's a 10-year-old book. It's been released again in the market. My publisher Kartika was here. The book had gone out of market last year because Amazon had closed Westland. Then a new Westland emerged, like New India. We have a new Westland, and they decided that this was too important a book to be out of print. So this has come out, and the book on the RSS is also going to come out, and the book on the Sikhs has already been, is there in the market. So they have actually revived these three books. And I'm extremely grateful to the publisher for this. My friend Prakash Nanda, who I think said we were not ideologically on two poles when we were in jail. So it's a post jail development. I stay where he was. He has gone somewhere else. I think I have the right to pull his leg a bit, given the fact that he goes back actually 4 decades. I was a very young person to come into jail. You were extremely fortunate to have actually come and really been able to understand uh, what to do and then just kind of drift into this profession. Awad also very old associate. For years, when I did a program on Lok Sabha television, he used to be my the last call to him. That Awad, I'm in problem. Can you please come and discuss? So he would always be there. And Mr. Shashi Sheikh, thank you very much for coming here and congratulations on your book. I confess that I have not been able to complete it, but I certainly will because Mr. Modi and the subject, which is Mann Ki Baat, continues to be a very major research field of mine. I also wrote when it covered completed a landmark very recently. So as I said, that uh, the book is 10 years plus old. Exactly in March 2013, came out to the market, 1st of May, very landmark day, 1st of May, the book was released in the market. It was a very uproarious launch, if I can actually say. Virtually, people came to verbal blows, if that is a mild way of putting it. It possibly reflected the time that we were in. That a book on Mr. Modi evoked the kind of contrasting emotions people and everybody was extremely surcharged. The one way of looking at me, if as an author, I can be very lazy and say that I wrote a great book. It has survived for 10 years, and that this is actually the proof that I have done a good job. But I think it's important as an analyst, somebody who actually wrote the book, because I wanted to understand politics of the BJP and the Sangh Parivar, and Mr. Modi's role within it and also outside it, and how he spearheaded the entire movement and gave it the kind of legitimacy which it has now. That is the reason as to why next year they will have completed a decade of being in power in the center. I think that the very fact that this book is there in the market and we are actually all gathered here to discuss Mr. Modi, it actually shows that the centrality of Mr. Modi has not gone away from Indian politics in the last 10 years. He still remains one of the most central and possibly uh, the biggest polarizing figure even now. You have extreme opinions about various sections. In fact, Mr. Modi had said during one of the elections, कि मुद्दा क्या है? मोदी ही मुद्दा. So as we all prepare for that's not my. I shall not name the organization which is identified with this species. Among friends, थोड़ा बहुत मजाक चलता है. So anyway, what I'm saying is that I think that Mr. Modi remains the central figure in Indian politics, and it is very important for us to understand. In the last 9 years, what has happened is also that on one level there has also been a failure of the opposition to be able to actually present some kind of a tangible opposition to BJP and Mr. Modi. There's also the issue that it's actually what we are seeing is possibly a very well planned and very well orchestrated personality cult. Yes, we are actually seeing a new kind of phenomenon which was not there. There have been previously leaders who were known for their very strong personality, very strong individuality. Jawaharlal Nehru, Indira Gandhi. But possibly it has never been as dominant as it is now. So there are a few things which have actually happened, which has possibly led to Mr. Modi being the kind of core position which he is there, and we have to understand. I do not think that anybody has a clear answer for any of the questions which come up. It's still in the process of trying to understand what are the successes of Mr. Modi as Prime Minister, as a political leader, and also as to what are the failures of the opposition in the country. We have to understand a few things, that Mr. Modi has actually perfected. This is, my viewpoint, that it's created a system where all the credit for whatever this government does goes to one individual. The responsibility is not borne by that individual. If you look at as the political career as a bank page, you have only credit points to Mr. Modi's account. You do not have anything. That's the way it is going. Now, to understand Mr. Modi, where he stands here in Indian politics is not in the business of trying to forecast what might happen in the next years. There are parliamentary elections. Some broad indications are there over which I'm sure that we'll be disagreeing quite a bit. But let's try to go back to 2014 and try to understand that why Mr. Modi was able to become the first leader after 1984 to be able to take his party to a majority on its own. It's very important that after 1984, 2014, 15 years, no single party had more than 270 seats. I think Mr. Modi had one advantage that he started his campaign from a platform of a discredited UP. For whatever be the reasons, UPA 2 got trapped in all kinds of allegations against itself. Why I'm saying is that allegations because subsequently cases came up and nothing, the charges that were made against him were never proved in any court of law. So nonetheless, that was the advantage. Why did Mr. Modi and the BJP were able to win 282 seats? I would say that it basically was the reason was threefold. One is that there was a large section of Indians who were thoroughly disillusioned with UP and were looking for an alternative. And in Mr. Modi and the vocabulary that he was using in 2013 and 14, they felt that he had left the politics of Hindutva behind. That he was no longer what we used to call the Hindu Hriday Samrat, that was the slogan of the label on Mr. Modi by journalists in the wake of the 2002 riots. That part of his persona had been put away. So that was one of the reasons as to why large sections of Indians who otherwise would never have looked at the kind of polarizing politics which Hindutva and the Sangh Parivar prophets for all these decades prior to 2014, 13, 14 had. The second was this remarkable way of making promises. It appeared that Mr. Modi had a promise for every section of the country. And that is what I think clicked in a big way. Everybody identified that he actually thinks like me. We have to accept the fact that, at least in this present generation of Indian politics, there has not been anybody who's a better communicator than Mr. Modi. That was one of the reasons. And the third is that an image was created that he is a very fine administrator who has created this all perfect Gujarat model. You could go around asking people what exactly is this Gujarat model? What has he done as a very good administrator? Why do you say all that? You possibly wouldn't have got many answers way back in 2013 and 14, but nonetheless, there was that image which actually happened. So now if we are actually 10 years down the line, if we actually want to look and assess that what has Mr. Modi done and what has he not done. So let us try to break down what has happened. That large sections of Indians, as I feel, that voted for the BJP and Mr. Modi because they felt that he left the politics of Hindutva behind. Where are we today as far as that issue is concerned? Just on Saturday, we had the Shivratri, which was the concluding day of the Kamar Yatra. And I'm sure that during the Kamar Yatra, all of you would have seen this video which went around everywhere of a Muslim couple getting harassed by a number of people for possibly the car brushed through, brushed past one of the Kamariyas, and then they being vilified and then pulled out, and the car was damaged, was overturned and damaged. Few weeks ago, there were reports that further away from Delhi, in the Noon district, you had police demolishing houses of people who were alleged to be cow slaughterers. This information was given to the police by Vigilantism. So what we are seeing is something very unique. After somebody like me who has actually covered the Sangh Parivar right from the 1980s onwards, in the initial years, the first vigilante action was there in the early 1990s, and it was by the Shiv Sena on Valentine's Day. So any kind of vigilante action used to be the domain of the people who were outside the Sangh Parivar. But in the last 9 years, we can give ample number of examples to actually say that they have either emerged from within the ecosystem of the Sangh Parivar, or they have been somehow or the other affiliated. Various statements have been made by the RSS chief as well as by people in government that this should happen. But beyond that, very little has been done to actually set an example that if you will behave in the same manner, action will be taken by the Indian state against you. So there is actually no real deterrent which has been said. I do not want to go into that. This is at one level the action which is happening in the field, and issues like the passage of the CAA and now the current moves being made on UCC. So my submission to all of you is that the belief which was there that a large section of Indians that he had left Hindutva behind turned out to be false, that it has not left Hindutva. some point, a large number of them have started also believing in the idea of Hindutva, and that is what possibly is the reason as to why this is sustainable. We do not really know that what are the figures on which side, but definitely I would say that if one actually tries to plot an imaginary graph of the value of Hindutva, and on the x-axis you put the number of years, and on the y-axis, the vertical axis, you put the value of Hindutva, we will say that right from 1980s onwards, it has been climbing steadily. It climbed steadily even between 2004 and 14, which is what actually led to the situation of emergence of voting. But it has also risen very dramatically between 2014 and 2023. That is what we are. And there are a large number of actions which are likely to happen between now and the next parliament elections. Most important to them, besides, of course, the UCC, we have to see what happens, is going to be the inauguration of the Ram Temple. We also have the Supreme Court hearing coming up on the Places of Worship Act. Either way, it is a win-win situation, because just yesterday we got to know that the Supreme Court has given till the 31st of October time to the centre to actually make its position clear on the Places of Worship Act. So, which means that there is a possibility that the judgment may come very tantalizingly close to the election. There is a possibility. Either way, it is a win-win situation for the BJP. So that is as far as the first point which I say. Second is the promises. I think on the promises side, the various promises which attracted the people towards Mr. Modi, there was of course the 15 lakh rupees, question of 15 lakh. The way it was put, eventually it became, Mr. Amit Shah in that interview. I just heard that interview again today, so that I was not making a mistake. He said that it had just been said figuratively. But throughout the campaign, it did not appear anywhere. On all these issues, there has been actually a major deficit. I think that there are many areas where it should have been done, has not been done. Jobs have not been generated. Price rise continues to be a major issue in the country, but people have internalized the fact that some existing ones being dropped. That is happening. Now, where are we actually standing at the moment? The minimum government, maximum governance, Mr. Modi would actually say that I am going to reduce the number of ministers and increase the workload of So these are the various things that promises were made, but to use the words of Mr. Amit Shah, everything was nothing but joke. Good administrator, I think the biggest episode where we can judge whether this government was led by a good administrator or not was possibly demonetization and COVID. These two handlings, I think, are the biggest failures in terms of administration of this government. I do not want to comment much. We know that demonetization started out with one purpose, it ended up with a completely different purpose. The goalposts kept on shifting. In fact, it introduced this vocabulary to Indian politics that the goalpost, Mr. Modi keeps on shifting the goalpost. Some smart journalists had actually created this jargon, and it has stayed on. So likewise for COVID, we all know. But the big question which is there for everybody to deliberate is as to why the blame does not get apportioned government. Why do people look at it that this is something which had to happen? Any government would not have been able to. No other government would have been able to do any better than what this has. The Gujarat model, which was also promoted very greatly, if we actually look back, while I was writing the new introduction to this book, I realized that something which we possibly missed during the days when we were assessing Mr. Modi's years as chief minister. A lot of these schemes were actually dry runs or kind of dress rehearsals for what he's done as prime minister. I'll give you two or three very short, you know, examples. One is that this promotion of the girl child in education. This is something which was there from Mr. Modi's government in Gujarat right from virtually after 2 years of him becoming stable and putting 2002 behind him. That was there. Then the other most symbolic thing, I'm talking in terms of politics also. You all know that 26th of November is now celebrated in this country, something which was introduced by Mr. Modi as the Constitution Day of this country. Now, we all missed that way back in 2010, I think it was 2010 only, that he actually started celebrating Constitution Day in some way or the other while being Gujarat Chief Minister and making a promise, ek din waqt aayega, that when we'll be able to do it all over the country. So maybe even people who were, I would say that as a biographer, it was also my failure that I possibly was not able to read that it is actually, he scripted the whole thing, that he's actually done dry runs, that when he becomes prime minister, these are the kind of things which he do. These are certain things which has to be girl child. Again, the problem here is that it is actually a bit more a question of a slogan, not so much about the intent is there, but the reality is completely different. We all know that Bachao, Beti Padhao. Two examples which I will cite. The BJP's response to the girl in Chandigarh who was a radio jockey being chased by a BJP leader's son. What was the response of the BJP at that time? And the second most important, which is actually played out in front of all of us, is the entire women's wrestlers issue. It is still unspooling because at the moment various state units have started making claims that these girls who are out as special privileges should not be given. I would not hazard to say, that it is quite possible that they might not ever represent India again, and that is the price they will pay for having raised the voice of protest. There's one last point. I know that time is short. It will take us long time to actually evaluate all these schemes and various things. Mr. Modi has been a scheme heavy regime. You can keep on listing, right from Jan Dhan to various other schemes. So it will take a long time for us to actually sift through all the data and to do it. There's one big question which I want to flag. That is 2024. We are not talking about. There is another elephant in the room which nobody is willing to talk about. At least they talk about only in private spaces. So I presume that this is a private space. In 2025, in September, on the 17th of September 2025, Mr. Modi will turn 75. Mr. Mohan Bhagwat would have turned 75 6 days earlier on the 11th of September 2025. There is no law, there has not been a rule in the BJP constitution that you're supposed to step down after you turn 75, but there is a convention and it has been used selectively to retire some political leaders. Will step down? Will Mr. Modi next year actually make an appeal to the people that this is the last time in my career that I am seeking votes? This thought came to me suddenly in the afternoon. That it is quite possible that it might happen. But this is something which will need to be tracked. I think it's not being talked about now, but will eventually get talked about in the next 2 years. Thank you. This is all I wanted to say. And then
Thank you. Radio was invented in the year 1900 and it was used as a popular mode of communication by an American president when he actually was the governor of New York in 1929. During the wars, customers Second World War, he used radio to communicate with the people, and that used to be covered by the media because he was trying to reach out, and television cameras, reporters calling the White House used to come and cover the event. Then, when India was fighting for independence, Subhash Chandra Bose used radio effectively, Azad in the radio. Then Mr. Modi started using it within months after he became the Prime Minister. And uh, gone through all the broadcasts on Mann Ki Baat, analyzed them, came up with this very interesting book. And they simultaneously went on in 39 languages and dialects in India, and 19 foreign languages, including Arabic, Pashto, French, and Mandarin. That means 50 languages. I have no idea if any radio broadcast ever went literally to the whole world in 50 different languages and dialects. So I want to invite Shashi to tell us about how he came to write about this book and his own association with Mr. Modi and whatever he wishes to say. Shashi.
Thank you. Thank you, Venkat, and thanks to the Foreign Correspondents Club for hosting this discussion. I think I'll have to go a bit off topic, off script after very interesting opening remarks by Mr. Kapadia. I thought kind of relevant to the overall discussion today. The first is a paper from the 1960s by a Norwegian professor, Johan Galtung, and it was titled The Structure of Foreign News. It was published in the Journal of Peace Research. It's very interesting because Professor Galtung identified what are the criteria that make news reporting make news reporting effective. And so he and his colleagues studied international conflicts and the kind of reporting that was happening in 4 major Norwegian newspapers. And they kind of identified 12 different criteria. But what is stunning, and perhaps which explains a lot of what we are seeing today, is that the dominant criteria was that the news report has to be something negative. It has to be something contentious, it has to be conflict oriented, it has to be controversial, only then news works. And interestingly, the UK Guardian interviewed Professor Galtung a few years back in 2019, and he kind of lamented what has happened with news media the world over. He says that they've taken all the wrong lessons from my papers, because his paper is one of the most cited papers in media studies. I think the Reuters Institute, I think it's Oxford University or Cambridge, I'm forgetting. So they also highlighted how this was a seminal paper in this domain. And what he was lamenting was the excessive negativity in news media, and that kind of breeds pessimism, confrontation, kind of deepens fault lines and fissures. A related study is something that one of my colleagues from during my time at Prasar Bharati worked on. where he analyzed around 4,500 media reports by various media houses, New York Times, Washington Post, Guardian, covering India over a period of a few years. More specifically, the period that Mr. Mukhopadhyay referred to, the CAA, the COVID period. And what is interesting is, again, you see, whatever Professor Galtung talked about, the excessive negativity is what is the pattern that emerges out of these 4,500 news reports. And this was, in fact, published in the Communicator magazine, which is a quarterly journal of the Indian Institute of Mass Communication, in December of 2021. So what we are seeing is that the prism through which Narendra Modi has been perceived or analyzed, not just this decade, perhaps even the last decade, is this very narrow prism of negativity, where certain incidents, certain topics have been cherry-picked, magnified, exaggerated, and then he's been defined, from that standpoint. And I think that is where this effort to look at Mann Ki Baat and this book comes in, because what we've tried to do here is, offer an alternative perspective. It's kind of odd, the dominant political movement has to offer an alternate perspective, because the dominant perspective, unfortunately, is a very negative perspective, which is very, very narrow. So if I have one word that I think sums up Mann Ki Baat across these 99 episodes that this book has looked at, I think it is about positivity. It is about hope. It is about the power of persuasion, the ability to bring about societal scale developmental change in a whole range of areas, be it sanitation, be it climate action. It is how do you motivate people to participate in developmental change? And I think that is what, when history sits down and looks at the Modi era, I think that will come across very strongly that, looking beyond all these controversies, looking beyond all the negativity, that there was a serious change that happened across the country. And there was a very relentless, month after month effort to bring about positive change. I think that kind of stands out. And it's kind of very unfortunate that, the global media has, only now taken note of Mann Ki Baat. In fact, it's kind of odd when the New York Times carried this long article on Mann Ki Baat recently during the Prime Minister's state visit to the US. The reporter made no mention of this book. So I asked him, how come you've written such a lengthy article on Mann Ki Baat and you've not even mentioned the one book that has been written on it? So he says, no, I read the book, but then he had no explanation for why it was not mentioned. So that kind of gives us an insight into how a very biased, cherry-picking manner in which media has tended to judge or analyze Narendra Modi. If you want to, truly understand the Modi phenomenon, I think it is important to understand his thought process. In fact, some of the examples that Mr. Mukhopadhyay just highlighted, I think, are interesting. That he went back to his chief ministerial years and saw, the beginnings of many things that have now emerged, during his prime ministerial tenure, be it the Constitution Day, be it the Girl Child. He also spoke about minimum government, maximum governance. But then if you dial back to, minimum government, maximum governance, it is not just something that just emerged in the 2014 campaign. In fact, if you look at Mr. Modi's speeches way back, even well before he was even a figure in the national scene or a serious contender for power in Delhi, back in 2016, 2017, 2006, 2007, he was talking about minimum government, maximum governance. You look at what he did with Jyotigram, for example, and power reforms in Gujarat. That's a very good example of bringing about change within this broader philosophy of minimum government, maximum governance. Now, when I look at Mann Ki Baat and the effort behind this book, what I've tried to do here was to identify, across various areas, be it open defecation-free villages, Swachh Bharat, be it going cashless with digital, a whole bunch of efforts and initiatives that he has attempted over the last 9 years. What are some of the common elements there? What is the thought process? And how has he gone about trying to bring out this change? And the interesting thing is, as part of this exercise, we reached out to several of the individuals that Mr. Modi has highlighted in his Mann Ki Baat. And then we spoke to them to understand how their life has changed. And it's kind of interesting how each one of them has become a prominent figure within their local community. Has become a role model, inspiring change, where others now want to emulate their work and take the message forward, be it rural entrepreneurship, be it Swachhta, be it cleaning, reviving water bodies, water harvesting. In fact, I would say water conservation as a theme has been a constant in Mr. Modi's career, going back all the way to his days as the Chief Minister of Gujarat. And you see what he's done with Mann Ki Baat is taken it to a national scale. Mr. Mukhopadhyay made an interesting observation about Narendra Modi's communication skills. I think he's clearly masterclass in terms of how you communicate at a scale of 1 billion, where you're able to reach the lowest common denominator. When you said that every part of society is able to relate to his message, it is because he has been able to target his message with the lowest common denominator in mind, and hence the messaging has the widest reach. Also, if you look at his entire career, he's not been afraid of experimenting and innovating with technology. He was using social media way before social media is what it is today. He figured out that if the mainstream media is not going to carry his message accurately, he has to directly reach out to the people. So you start seeing him using YouTube, live streaming of his speeches, way back in the late 2000s. He was one of the first to do a Google Hangout. In fact, I recall this happened in 2012 when YouTube servers in India crashed because there was so much of audience interest in his Google Hangout. And then you see that use of technology in 2014 campaign when all of us worked. People from the industry who came and volunteered, participated in his campaign. At that time, a very interesting platform was created called India 272, where digital volunteering was possible. So for the first time, you had the barrier lowered for people to participate in a political campaign. Mr. Mukhopadhyay was talking about Hindutva. What he has missed out is that an entire generation of individuals from different walks of life, professionals, students, who otherwise would not have walked into a BJP office, got associated with the campaign to elect Mr. Modi because of this digital platform. It just lowered the barrier, made it easy for people to get involved. I think that was a path-breaking moment. And you see that momentum has sustained over these many years, 9 years. And with when he became the Prime Minister, India 272 evolved into this platform called MyGov, where you see MyGov as a way in which citizens can participate digitally in various initiatives of the government. Then, of course, Mann Ki Baat, which kind of takes it at a mass scale, where your outreach to citizens, volunteers, NGOs, communities across India on various change initiatives is now happening through the broadcast medium. And Mann Ki Baat itself has evolved. If you see the use of technology in Mann Ki Baat, it is very interesting. It is the only radio program which is adapted for television. So you not only have the audio, but you have visuals overlaid on it. And then, of course, it's translated in different languages. It's available digitally on all the platforms. And the manner in which inputs are sourced for Mann Ki Baat also uses technology in a very creative way. In fact, there is a pattern that has continued from his campaign days, where every important speech would crowdsource ideas and inputs using digital platforms and using social media. Same thing is happening with Mann Ki Baat, where you have MyGov as a source of inputs, you have Twitter and Facebook, you have IVR where people call it. Of course, you also have the good old traditional way in which people write in letters. So you see that the themes within Mann Ki Baat are very diverse because of this. And it is not just Mr. Modi's monologue. He's sourcing ideas and inputs from a very wide diversity of audiences. And then that's reflected in Mann Ki Baat. And if you look at the core thrust of Mann Ki Baat, it is positivity to induce behavioral change at a very mass scale, and to do it by invoking cultural symbols, cultural icons. Mr. Mukhopadhyay talked extensively about Hindutva. I mean, isn't it stunning that across 99 episodes of Mann Ki Baat, Hindutva there's not a single mention of Hindutva anywhere. Uh, However, he has invoked cultural icons and cultural icons from every part of India, not just one community, one religion, or one language. You see, Subramanya Bharati being talked about. You see Sister Nivedita being talked about. You see all kinds of heroes from different parts of India being talked about. When the idea that the local communities, the local organizers, people who are working at the grassroots, bring about change, draw inspiration from these various icons and heroes. You also see culture being invoked consistently across Mann Ki Baat, be it for Swachhata, be it for water conservation, so that traditional methods of climate action, traditional methods of water harvesting, these are preserved, these are popularized. Uh, Similarly, water bodies, especially water bodies in large temples across South India, for example, or Rajasthan, step wells of Gujarat. So you see a very consistent pattern where he's used culture in a very creative way to motivate behavioral change at a mass scale. So if you look at where India stands today, as we head into 2024, one thing becomes very clear. Hindutva versus anti-Hindutva, secularism versus communalism. I don't agree with that framing of the political debate as it stands today. To me, the political debate is that on the one side, you have those who believe that the glass is half empty, nothing has happened, no promises have been fulfilled, everything has gone bad. So you have this overwhelming politics of negativity, which is all rooted in hurt, demands, and pessimism. And on the other side, you have Mr. Modi offering an alternate vision of hope and optimism, where he's focusing that the glass is half full, and then we need to make it full. And here's the roadmap for the next 2 decades, what he calls the Amrit on what needs to be done across India in various sectors, so that we become a nation by 2047. So that is a very clear distinction that you see in politics today. And I think that is where the effort of this book was to bring to light that there's a positive way of doing politics. And here is a blueprint for developmental change that the world also can learn from. Right? If you look at a scale of 1 billion, we just have 2 countries to learn from, right? India and China. And the Chinese model, as we all know, is very, very distinctly different. It's very authoritarian. It's non-democratic, and as opposed to it, you have the Indian model, which Mr. Modi has been championing, which is rooted in persuasion, motivational behavioral change, drawing inspiration from cultural roots, and focusing on positive issues. And it's very democratic and participatory, as we have seen, in the various initiatives, where he's tried to involve citizens, involve communities, make them part of this larger movement. And that's how we do change at a scale of 1 billion, right? We are not a New Zealand, we're not a Singapore. Our approach to solving these problems has got to be different, and it can't be a Chinese approach. It's a very distinctly Indian approach. And while researching this book, I was kind of astounded that there are more than 400 academic papers that have studied Mann Ki Baat. In fact, this is something that we hardly read about in the media because nobody has paid attention. And not all of these 400 papers are, very charitable to Mr. Modi. Some of them are very critical of him. But at the same time, all of them have recognized the power of persuasion that is embodied within Mann Ki Baat. And they brought out these various dimensions. Some of those papers are cited in this book as well. So let me just sum up, the way often the Prime Minister says that democracy can deliver a way to understand the underlying method that he has been, adopting and practicing is, to look at positivity and to look at ways in which you can motivate and persuade people, communities to become part of this change movement. Mann Ki Baat has been a very important element of that. And its impact on India is something that this book is. Thank you.
Was Franklin Delano Roosevelt the inspiration for Mr. Modi, and the sweep of subjects chosen for Mann Ki Baat is so vast? How many people actually work to make this happen? Do you have any information on that?
Good question. So, in fact, Mr. Modi has talked about what was the inspiration for using radio for his Mann Ki Baat, and I think it is also in one of the episodes as well. This was during his years as the secretary at the BJP when he was in Himachal, and he was at a tea stall, and he heard breaking news on radio about the, I think it was Pokhran test, and he says that that kind of it struck him that how radio continues to be very important for reach the remotest of regions of India. And I've seen that myself while working in Prasar Bharati. You were mentioning the different languages. In fact, larger than the languages is the pool of dialects in which Indian radio produces content. It's more than 100 dialects. Especially when you go to the Northeast, you've got a very diverse set of audiences who need to be reached out using these languages. And the power of that, I witnessed during COVID. I know Mr. Mukhopadhyay said COVID was a failure. I mean, I'm astounded. How can you say that? We had more than 2 billion vaccines delivered, and we didn't have zero COVID. I'm sorry. Right? You look at the Chinese model and look at India. Two very large nations with very different approaches, and look how admirably we perform. So I cannot, come to terms with this characterization that COVID was a failure. In fact, the challenge was how do you do public communication in a diverse country like India, where hundreds of dialects, you have to get the COVID messaging right. And that was a phenomenal challenge. And not only did the public broadcasters step up, but even the private media played a huge role in getting out that message. So in terms of the diversity of topics and the number of people, I would say it's large. A lot of technology is used to drill down what are people interested in, what are people asking for. But at the end of it, at the end of the day, it is Mr. Modi's creativity. He picks the subjects. He decides what subjects make sense or are relevant. And Mr. Mukhopadhyay made an interesting observation that all the credit goes to one man and none of the responsibility. I don't quite agree with that. When you look at the two biggest issues where Mr. Modi took a public position, defended it all the way. In fact, these two subjects are also dedicated episodes in Mann Ki Baat. The first was the land acquisition bill during the first term. And the second, of course, was the farm bills. Both those cases, people, went to the people and said that, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I need to withdraw. So I don't quite buy this argument that, all credit is one person and no responsibility. Absolutely not. In fact, if anything, he took the responsibility of making his case to the people, not just in Parliament, but also through where he tried to dispel whatever misinformation is out there, clarify the issues, put it out there, and then see where the process goes. So, in terms of number of people, I think, as I said, it's what
Before I throw the thing to Q&A, I want to ask Nilanjan one question. Nilanjan, you point out that Modi was nursing the ambition of becoming the Prime Minister of India even when he was the Chief Minister. In the year 2012, he encouraged people to hold placards saying Modi for PM and stuff like that. And Time magazine ran a cover story on Modi when he was the Chief Minister, which is very, very unusual. Obviously, he secretly made his mind about the Prime Ministership a long time ago, and his Chief Ministership in Gujarat, he was using it with an eye on Delhi because he wanted to rule India. Uh, and I was in Goa when he was made the chief of the parliamentary election committee, and Advani resigned in protest, things like that. At that point of time also it was becoming very clear he was going to be the prime minister candidate of the BJP, and the public opinion across the country, the manner in which he was using television to reach out to people, was bearing from the view that yes, this is the man he kept and vote for. 9 months before the next general election, the popularity rating of this man after 9 years, after being the prime minister, 9 years is more than 50%. And if he does make it the third term, it will be historic because Nehru was the man who won 3 consecutive elections and became the prime minister. So, what are your observations on that?
So firstly, I think that it's not wrong to be ambitious. The political leader, I think, whoever is there, and is not not in any way being ambitious is, I think, in the wrong business somewhere else. Uh, yes, Mr. Modi definitely had ambitions to go beyond Gujarat. And, possibly it's something which we'll never be able to know as to when it came. Did it come at the crack of dawn? Did it come in, the stroke of night? All these are things, which will be said by various people. We'll never really get to the truth because I do not think that he would talk about this. Why should? What is the real need? The closest that I got to is that I had asked him very frankly in one of the interviews that why you see for yourself a role beyond what is your current job. I am forgetting that what were the exact words, but I remember my question. But I remember his exact words. He said that ये बड़ा loaded सवाल है. Typical Modi speak, but loaded सवाल. So he put the entire onus on. If I say yes, then आप कहेंगे कि I'm over ambitious. If I say no, you will say that I'm not at all ambitious. So I leave it to all people your own judgment. आप लोग तय करें कि मैं क्या करूँ. I think this is the way I also put it in this book. I do recall because without any sanitization, I was truthful to everything that he said to me. Even things, which appeared to me fairly awkward. Like he said that I asked him, I have an entire chapter. It's a fascinating chapter. Please read it, called the Modi Kutta. You'll understand why he looks the way he does. It's actually the evolution of the Modi fashion, or rather the fashionable man. So I asked him, "Ki you wear these half sleeves, Modi kurta?" He said, "कि actually मैं सफर करता था, तो कपड़ा छोटा करने के लिए तय करने में आसानी होती है. Like the sleeves were consuming space in the suitcase." I did not buy this argument. It was, of course, thought out in a certain way, but I did not in any way make fun of it while saying that. I said, let the statement be as it is, and let the reader decide whether this claim is correct or not. I did not ask anything about his education. Whatever he said, I have reproduced in this book. Face value, he claimed that he used to come to Delhi during emergency while being underground, carrying prohibited literature, while doing a correspondence course from Delhi University, getting his graduation, and then doing his MA from Gujarat University. And, all that thing is there. I used to, anyway, that's a personal, I should not talk about it. So, I think that, I, for one, just a minor, Shashi Shekhar was actually making repeated mention of my name. So I was reminded of what Mr. Modi said कि मेरे दूसरे लोग हैं मेरा नाम लेते हैं तो उनको कहीं ना कहीं लगता होगा कि उन्होंने कुछ ढंग की बात की. I actually didn't take that on you. That I possibly said something, possibly nice. I actually can't help it. What you call it negativity that I have always grown up in this profession. Venkat would also possibly agree. I would also agree. We have grown in this profession by saying, that news is what something somebody somewhere wants to hide. No. What I grew up is that news is something which somebody somewhere sometime wants to suppress. Everything else is public relations. My job, I came into this profession in the post-emergency years. So we came in with the idea of seeing the state as being the suppressor of information. It is my job. I can't help it to look for the half-empty glass, not to look at the full glass. But Mr. Modi also looks only in the of the pre 2014 the half empty glass, not as a half full glass. So it's a question of what you want to look at, what you want to prioritize. I do not think that most of us in this room would think that the media is not a facilitator of government's message. For that, there is Pravda. There used to be Pravda in Soviet Union, and for that, there has been a public broadcaster with which I was associated for a fairly long period of time over various governments. So we know that what the public broadcaster does in this country. I think that is it. Sure.
No, I just wanted an answer. You said re-legitimation of what? Governance and government. That's a different matter whether the number of ministers reflect government and governance or that discussion. But that's a different thing. You said that demonetization, you talked about lack of governance, you talked about unemployment, you talked about inflation, you said that the promises that he did were not delivered. So can you explain it to me? What was the reason that Modi, who got 274 in 2014, got 305 in 2019? Thank you.
My assessment is one word: Pulwama. At the second word, if you wish, Balakot. Let's go back to 2018. 2018 was just after the Gujarat election, when for the first time the BJP did not win 100 plus seat. They came down to a two-digit mark. Had it not been for the Congress messing up the last lap of the electoral race, the election verdict could have been different. There was a very famous dinner in a South Delhi house, which actually enabled Mr. Modi to completely turn the tables. I remember that election very carefully because we were traveling through Gujarat and we saw that how the mood changed in the last 3 days. 2018, one by-election after by-election, the BJP was losing, starting with Kairana. Kairana, the BJP put in all its might, including Mr. Modi addressing a by-election, Lok Sabha by-election. He takes every election very seriously. He, as well as Mr. Amit Shah also. Every election is fought as bitterly as any other election. Things were not really very good for the BJP throughout 2018. They ended up losing. Nobody was really a victorious kind of a situation in 2018. Everything changed from the 14th of February onwards. It took Mr. Modi several days to realize that the tide had turned, because if you actually go back and look at the negotiations between the BJP and the Shiv Sena over parliamentary distribution of seats, it happened on the 18th or the 19th of February, where the BJP accepted the Shiv Sena demand of an enhanced number of seats. Anybody who has actually worked very closely with Mr. Modi knows that you cannot get away with making a public demand and getting it accepted. It's not in his nature. Everybody has, an intrinsic nature, which is the first response of that person. So that's a kind of response which is there, especially when it comes from a political ally, from somebody who the party is convinced that we need to take on the dominant position in the state. Right from 2014 onward, both Mr. Modi as well as Amit Shah, they were clear that we have to take on the dominant position in this settlement which was there between the Shiv Sena and started out by Pramod Mahajan and when Baat was alive, that should not continue. So I do not think that on the 18th or 19th of February, Mr. Modi was certain that the tide will completely turn in his favor. It happened after Balakot. There are various ways of looking at Balakot. What I'm saying is that it created a fairly ultra nationalistic to the contrary.
My question is to Mr. Shashishekar. How do you look at this recent foreign trip and how the way through sidelines somehow is being mediated or questions regarding minorities, etc. So particularly after Mohit regime and US tried to intervene also. Was it politically understood or was there any serious thought behind that offer? Thank you.
See, it's very clear that since he's become prime minister and he's been doing these various visits, two things have emerged. One is, of course, the India story, which is rising, and how the world is looking at India, especially from an investment standpoint, from a strategic relationship standpoint. Clearly, there's a difference between what was the situation earlier and since he's become prime minister. The second aspect is the manner in which he has been able to connect with the diaspora and create a very strong connect, instill a sense of pride in the diaspora, and that has also had its impact in different parts of the world. What we are seeing is that, again, going to the glass being half full or half empty analogy, there is a certain group of activists who have, sympathizers here in India and of course abroad, who have been in a very sustained manner trying to create this narrative of, democracy is backsliding in India, human rights are in danger and so on. And there's very clear reason why this particular narrative has been created. If you see, all of this starts from around 2019 onwards, after the CAA, and then you had this Koregaon case with these activists arrested, and you see the pattern of narrative building has been very prominent since then. It is ironic because if you take the, for example, which again has been a point in which a lot of this narrative has been created. Mexico has had the highest number of journalist deaths. It's the most dangerous country for journalists, more than Ukraine and Syria, which are war zones. And Mexico's freedom of press index is higher than India. So it's kind of absurd that a country which has the maximum number of journalist deaths is ranked higher and India is ranked lower. So it's clear that this narrative that is being created, and especially these op-eds that appear when the prime minister is visiting these various countries, there is a method behind that, and it all traces back to very specific political motives. It's very unfortunate because these are it's one thing to be critical of policies, but it's quite another to create a completely false narrative and then repeat it ad nauseum as if it's the truth. So I mean, it's very unfortunate.
My question is Narendra, to you. As someone who has followed Modi for a very long time, before he became the chief minister, when he became the chief minister, then as prime minister, and he's had a fair share of criticisms also along the way, very harsh critiques. I'm just curious, what is it that, because you have observed him so closely, what is it that makes him the success that he is, despite all our critiques? What is it, could you point out, you say this is his quality, which has led him to this, the success which nobody would have thought possible, frankly, when he was not even the CEO of.
No, I think, to start, he's extremely hardworking. I've actually not come across many political leaders who work as hard as he does. And he's extremely communicative. At least in the time that he has been there, he's somebody who understands. He's actually the dream copywriter, if I can actually use the word. I'm just trying to use a jargon that he knows what exactly to say, how to say, with and somebody who always learns and has grown in his job. I have actually gone back and looked at some of his earlier speeches. He didn't have as powerful a delivery as he has today, which means that he's taken lessons, because this obviously appears to have honed his skills. How do you do it? You obviously have had some kind of inputs that this is not the way you should be speaking. This is the better way to speak. And somebody who improves. So I think that is something which we have to accept, which I do.
Yes, please.
If I can,
Take a word,
if I can just add to what Mr. Mukherjee just said, let's take the example of speeches, right? You can go back to some of his older speeches. Some of them are there on YouTube. In fact, I would particularly draw attention to a speech that he gave in Chennai after he got re-elected. He was invited by then Chief Minister Jayalalitha for Pongal lunch, and then he gave a speech at the Tughlaq's magazine's annual event, and that entire speech was in English and extempore. So I don't quite buy this argument that someone is giving him inputs. I think he has a natural talent and flair for it. And just to also highlight one other point that was said earlier about the Modi kurta and the way he dresses up. In fact, there's an interview. It's available on YouTube. This was an interview by Rajiv Shukla. I think late 90s, early 2000, where he talks about this. So it's not that it's something that he made up along the way. I mean, these are the same thing that he said way back.
What about the comments? The comments and the content is not
I'm not sure whether we're fumbling when there is no teleprompter, because I think maybe it's age catching up, maybe just the sheer volume of speeches, right? Just the number of speeches that he gives on a daily basis.
But if you finish the statement, the sentence will be so that is embarrassing.
I'm sure he would be paying attention to the feedback.
Last two questions. Yes.
So my question is from Nilanjan. I would like to use the word collective spirit. The word used by Mr. Sekhar. Do you think instead of collective is self-centered?
Sorry, I couldn't.
Do you think Narendra Modi has used the word collective spirit? Shashi Sekhar, you put it right. So do you think Narendra Modi is instead of the collective He's self-centered. You see the some decisions, whatever decision he has taken, and that was not a collective decision, I think. That was taken by himself by the Modi. Nobody knows. I would like to give example of demonetization. Even other people are not aware of the decision at that time.
So he definitely is somebody who believes in the role of the individual being very central. But one of his very senior officers who worked with him in Gujarat, he made a comment, which has stayed with me for all these years that he made. He said that Mr. Modi is actually, he decides what he has to do. It is his decision always. Like on grid separation of electricity in the domestic and the agricultural was actually his final decision when the entire electricity department said that it can't be done. So he said that the final decision is his. But Mr. Modi has this very uncanny ability to use somebody else's knowledge for his benefit. So I think it sums up, as a good leader, that somebody who will listen to somebody who he trusts, that he has knowledge, but then would use that knowledge in the way that he thinks is going to be politically and policy-wise best suited for him. Mr. Modi's primary commitment is to furthering the political power which is in his control. I am very clear about that.
Actually, I want to ask the question on the ending of the China issue. Like, they have been said and it has been reported that China is ending away our territory and they have taken the territory. And initially, the response of the Prime Minister was initial days that China has not taken any, not even an inch of territory. And then, media, electronic media has been reporting that China did China has taken some territory and still we are dealing with this problem. And so I mean, it can be answered by any of the questions. What is the effect position? Because still in the public domain it is there that China has been taking our territory and they are entered inside and we are not able to receive it back. In spite of our best efforts, and the Prime Minister has not responded or aside after that initial sharing that where China is not taking the inch of territory and we are having all the territory with us. So any of the expert panelists and responded. Still it is going on. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I don't know any more than any of us do in the public domain. But I can, highlight one thing, right? When a lot of the focus in the media has been that, China is nibbling away territory, we are ceding away territory, we're not talking, we're not doing anything. But we forget that during the peak of COVID, we took very decisive measures to push back on China on the digital side, right? We were the first ones to ban TikTok, and now you see the rest of the world is, following our lead, and, looking at the dangers of posed by China from a data standpoint, and look at what has happened. So I don't think everything has to be a commentary in the media. I don't believe that the Prime Minister has to comment on every issue. As long as there is a strategy in place and we are working towards that strategy, and it's quite evident the manner in which the big powers of the world are rallying behind India. In fact, I don't know if you attended the Raisina dialogue, which happened months back in Delhi. I mean, it was very clear that China was an outlier, it was a pariah. The strategic conversations that matter in the world were happening in India, with India being the host. So I think there's a clear method to the strategy, and of course, not all of it is in the public domain, perhaps for good reasons. I would trust, what they're doing.
Before I invite while Abba to the vote of thanks, we want to give a small present to both our distinguished speakers as a gesture of gratitude.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vika. Thank you. On behalf of the Foreign Correspondent Club, we'd like to thank Mr. Shashi and Mr. Nilanjan for making this happen. And I'm sure if I am also allowed to vote, I will vote for Modi next election after I'm listening to this kind of positive energy people generated at the club. Though I should not speak on those lines more than this, but I would say that lots of things we have learned from the book of Nilanjan, which we have discussed it earlier also, long years back when we started this book. And also Mr. Shashi had added for us the Monkey Baat, which we have also been listening to it. And I think we can benefit from this book talks. We can also buy the book because the books are available outside with the concessional rate. So it is still relevant because the election is coming, and I'm sure you will find it very interesting to read it, where you will be able to elaborate and see the value of these books for the next election and the next terms of Mr. Modi, which is everybody's projecting. How much they will score, that's what we will keep it for the predictions, and we will wait for it. The club is also open for all our friends, for foreign journalists, Indian journalists, corporate members, to welcome you all to be a member of the club. And please, if you are quoting any of our friends on the book or the discussion, do mention the Foreign Correspondent Club that the discussion has been taking place here. Thank you once again. I'm looking forward to see you all here. Thank you.